The grand concert hall in Vienna was a jewel box of light and sound. It was intermission, and the air buzzed with the happy chatter of people dressed in their finest clothes. They sipped champagne, their voices a warm hum under the glittering chandeliers. In the center of it all, like a king holding court, stood the man they had all come to see, the renowned pianist Anton Wels. He was a tall man, with sharp features and hands that moved like birds when he talked. A small crowd of admirers surrounded him, hanging on his every word. He spoke about music, but not in a way that felt joyful. He spoke of it as a difficult conquest, a mountain only the most disciplined should try to climb. Technique is the cage we build, he was saying, his voice carrying, so that the wild animal of emotion can run free inside it. Without the cage, you have only chaos. His followers nodded, impressed by his clever words. As he spoke, his eyes, which were a cool, pale blue, wandered across the luxurious lobby. They passed over rich carpets and gilded frames until they stopped at the public grand piano. It sat in a corner, a beautiful, silent beast with its lid closed. And beside it stood a woman. She was older, perhaps in her late 60s. Her dress was simple and neat, but it lacked the shine and fashion of the other guests. She was not talking to anyone. Instead, she stood very close to the piano, not touching it, but her fingers traced invisible lines along the curve of its polished black lid. Her expression was distant, soft, as if she was listening to a song no one else could hear. Something about her quiet absorption annoyed the maestro. Here, in this temple of high art, she looked like a tourist admiring a statue. It broke the spell of his own importance. A small, unkind idea sparked in his mind. It would be a lesson for his admirers, a living example of the difference between true artists and mere dreamers. He raised his voice just a little, ensuring his circle could hear. "Look there," he said, a smile playing on his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "See how the instrument calls to song. It has a magnetic pull for those who love the idea of music, even if they lack the language to speak it." His followers turned to look, their gazes settling on the unsuspecting woman. She seemed to feel the attention and glanced up, her peaceful expression shifting to one of mild confusion. The maestro decided to commit to his performance. He took a few graceful steps toward the piano, his entourage parting for him. All other conversations in the area began to fade as people noticed the famous pianist on the move. He stopped a few feet from the woman. Up close, he could see the fine lines on her face and the gentle weariness in her eyes. "Good evening," he said, his tone polite but edged with something else. "I see the piano has captured your attention." The woman, whom we will call Ilara, gave a small, hesitant nod. "It is a beautiful instrument," she said quietly, her voice accented from a place further east. "It is," Anton agreed, his voice now projected for an audience. "It is a partner for conversation. But a conversation requires two skilled speakers, does it not?" He let the question hang, and a few people from his group offered quiet, nervous laughs. "You seem to have a certain affection for it. Would you care to grace us with a tune before the second half of the real concert begins?" He gestured grandly toward the piano bench. "Perhaps something simple? A little folk song from your youth?" The invitation was not kind. It was a challenge wrapped in fake courtesy. The air in that part of the lobby grew tense and still. People stopped pretending to talk. All eyes were on Ilara. She looked from the maestro's confident, challenging face to the sea of staring strangers around them. She saw pity in some eyes, curiosity in others, and in many, the anticipation of watching an embarrassing spectacle. Her first instinct was to shrink away, to melt into the crowd and disappear. A deep flush crept up her neck. She had not asked for this. She had only come to hear the music, to be near it for one evening. But as she looked at the piano, something in her settled. A quiet defiance, or perhaps a deep old sadness that outweighed her current fear. She did not answer with words. Instead, she looked directly at Anton Vels, and with a dignity that surprised everyone watching, she gave one slow, firm nod. Then she turned and walked the few steps to the piano bench. The sound of her simple shoes on the marble floor seemed very loud in the silence. She sat down, her back straight. For a long moment, she simply looked at the keys, black and white like a silent promise. The maestro watched, his arms now crossed over his chest, a faint, victorious smile on his lips. He had set the stage. Now he expected the lesson to play itself out. He imagined fumbling scales, wrong notes, a proof of his own point about talent and discipline. Ilara took a deep, slow breath that shuddered just a little. She lifted her hands. They were not a pianist's hands in the way Anton's were. They were older, with veins slightly raised, hands that had known other kinds of work. She held them above the keys, trembling slightly from the pressure of 100 eyes upon her. Then she let them fall. The first sound was a single, lonely note. It hung in the air, clear but fragile, like a drop of water. Then another, and another. They were simple notes, searching for each other, not yet forming a melody. Her fingers, which had seemed so steady a moment before, now looked stiff and unsure on the smooth ivory. They stumbled a little, pressing a key too hard, then too soft. The tune that began to emerge was halting, a child's piano piece played by someone who had almost, but not quite, forgotten it. A few people in the crowd shifted on their feet. Some looked down at the floor, feeling a wave of second-hand embarrassment. This was exactly what they had feared. It was painful to watch. They wished the maestro had not put this poor woman in such a spot. Whispers started to rise again, this time filled with pity. "Oh, dear," murmured a woman in a silk scarf. A man adjusted his glasses and looked away. The maestro, Anton Vels, allowed his smile to become a little more visible. It was a small, tight smile of confirmation. He gave a barely there sigh, as if to say to his followers, "Asterisk, you see? This is what I meant, asterisk." He unfolded his arms and placed one hand lightly on the edge of the piano, his posture relaxing. The performance was going as he had predicted. He watched with the detached interest of a scientist observing a failed experiment. Her hands, he noted, had no proper technique. The wrists were too stiff, the fingers too flat. This was not music. It was the shadow of music. Ilara seemed to shrink into herself under the weight of the silence, which felt louder than any noise. Her shoulders hunched slightly. She could feel the disappointment in the room, a collective wish for her to stop. The simple folk tune she had started seemed to crumble under her own nervousness. She missed a note, tried to find it again, and produced a discordant jumble of sound instead. A soft, awkward cough came from the back of the crowd. The spell of the concert hall was broken. This was just an uncomfortable interruption now. Anton decided it was time to step in to end the charade with a gracious word. He opened his mouth, ready to say something like, "Thank you for the brave attempt," and reclaim his stage, but he never got the chance. Just as he drew breath to speak, Ilara stopped. Her hands froze above the keys. For a few heartbeats, there was only the echo of that last wrong note, fading into the hushed lobby. She did not look up at the crowd or at the maestro. She stared at her own hands, suspended in the air as if they were strange to her. Then she did something unexpected. She closed her eyes. It was not a slow, dramatic closing. It was a firm shutting away of the world of the glittering lights, the staring faces, the famous pianist beside her. She was pulling a curtain between herself and all of them. When her eyes closed, her entire face changed. The lines of tension and embarrassment softened. Her forehead, which had been creased, Smooth Dot, she took a different kind of breath this time. It was deeper, slower. It was not the shallow gasp of someone trying not to cry, but the breath of someone diving into deep water. Her shoulders, which had been hunched, lowered and settled. She seemed to be listening to something, or remembering something. Far away from this grand room, Dot, her hands began to lower again, but now they moved differently. They were no longer stiff, searching things. They moved with a new purpose, a gentle certainty. They found a new starting place on the keyboard, lower down in the darker, richer notes Dot, and then she began to play. This was not the simple, clumsy tune from before. This was something else entirely. Her right hand began a melody that was unspeakably old and sad. It was a winding, aching line of notes that seemed to tell a story without words. It spoke of wide, open fields under a gray sky, of a hearth that had gone cold, of a long, lonely road. It was not flashy or complex, but every note was filled with a weight, a true feeling that shook the air. Her left hand joined, not with the complicated chords of a concert piece, but with a slow, rocking rhythm. It was like a heartbeat, or the gentle swaying of a train on its tracks. Together, the hands created a sound that was simple, raw, and beautiful in a way that polished perfection could never be. The last of the whispers in the lobby died. The woman with the silk scarf forgot to adjust it. The man who had looked away now stared, his mouth slightly open. The feeling in the room shifted so fast, it was like a physical change in the weather. The awkward pity evaporated, replaced by a dawning sense of wonder. Anton Velis's relaxed hand, resting on the piano, slowly tightened into a fist. His confident smile vanished, wiped clean from his face. He stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the woman's moving hands. He, a master who knew every great piece ever written for the piano, did not recognize this music. And yet he understood it immediately. This was not from a book. This was from a life. This was from a memory so deep and personal it had become a song. He listened, and the expert inside him, the part that always judged technique, fell silent. Because he was no longer hearing notes and rhythm. He was hearing a soul speaking, and it was saying something so true, so full of real sorrow and quiet strength, that it left no room for judgment. It only asked to be felt. The maestro's own breath caught in his throat. He had asked for a simple tune, and she had offered him a piece of her heart instead. And in that moment, he knew, with a sinking certainty, that he had been utterly and completely wrong. The melody did not get louder, but it grew. It seemed to fill every corner of the grand lobby, pushing back the silence until there was no room left for anything but the sound of the piano. The simple, rocking rhythm of her left hand was like the steady turning of the earth, and the right hand's melody was the wind moving through the trees. Telling an ancient story, the people standing there forgot where they were. They forgot about their expensive coats and their intermission drinks growing warm in their hands. The music pulled them into its own world. A man who worked in a bank, his mind always full of numbers, felt a sudden, sharp memory of his grandmother's kitchen, of the smell of bread from a childhood he hadn't thought about in years. A young woman, a student feeling lonely in the big city, heard in the notes understanding of her own homesickness, and her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. The music was not happy. It was a song of deep blue feeling. It spoke of missing people and places. It spoke of carrying a weight for a long, long time. But within the sadness, there was also a thread of strength. It was the sound of remembering, of carrying a love that loss could not erase. It was beautiful because it was true. All the while, Alara played with her eyes closed. She was not here in this shining Viennese hall anymore. The polished marble under her feet, the crystal chandeliers above, they had all dissolved. In her mind, she was somewhere else entirely. She was in a small village, much further east. The air there smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, not perfume. The floor under her feet was worn, uneven wood, and the piano she saw was not this grand, perfect thing. It was an old, upright piano in the corner of a simple village church. Its surface was scratched, and some of the keys were chipped and yellowed. But the sound it made was warm, like a familiar voice. She was a girl again, sitting on a hard bench, her feet not touching the floor. Her mother was standing beside her, a hand resting gently on her small shoulder. "Play the song for your father," her mother would whisper. And she would. It was this same melody, the one her own grandmother had taught her. It was a lullaby, a song for sending loved ones to sleep, and also a song for remembering them when they were gone. Her fingers moved now, not from memory of notes on a page, but from the memory of feeling. She felt the smooth, cool ivory of the old church piano's keys. She heard the sound of rain on the church's roof, mixing with the music. She saw the faces of the people from her village, gathered on a Sunday, listening quietly, their faces soft in the candlelight. That piano was the heart of the village. It sang for their weddings, for their holidays, and for their farewells. The music pouring from her now was the sound of that lost world. Every note was a name, a face, a scent, a skyline of humble roofs and church spires. She played for the father who had hugged her before leaving for the fields one morning and never returned. She played for the mother who had hummed this tune while mending clothes by the fire. She played for the silence that had fallen over the village one terrible season, a silence broken only by the sound of fear and then by a final, crushing quiet. She did not play the sadness of the events themselves. She played the love that existed before them. She played the warmth of the hearth, the safety of the community, the unshakable bond of family. The melody was a bridge made of sound, stretching back through time to bring that love into this cold, glittering room. Back in the lobby, no one moved. A security guard near the door had stopped his patrol and was leaning against the wall. His professional sternness melted away. The waitstaff, who usually moved through the crowd like silent ghosts, stood still with their trays held forgotten. The maestro, Anton Wels, had not moved a muscle. His hand was still a tight fist on the piano's edge, but now it was white-knuckled. His proud face had gone pale. He was a master of sound, a man who could break a piece of music apart and explain its machinery. But he could not break this. This was not machinery. This was a human spirit, speaking directly to every other spirit in the room. He felt a strange, hot shame creep up from his chest. His taunting invitation echoed in his mind. Perhaps something simple? This was the furthest thing from simple. This was the most complex thing he had ever heard, because it was not built from notes, but from a life. He had wanted to teach a lesson about the difference between a professional and an amateur, but she was teaching him the difference between technique and truth. The flawless, powerful pieces he played in the concert hall felt suddenly empty next to this raw, aching lullaby from a lost home. For the first time in many, many years, Anton Wels, the world-renowned pianist, felt like the amateur. He felt like a child who had been making noise while a real adult spoke of important things. A single tear escaped from the closed eye of a woman in the crowd. It traced a slow path down her powdered cheek. Then another person's eyes glistened. They did not sob. There was no sound but the piano. The tears were quiet, a natural response to witnessing something private and sacred. They were not crying for her, exactly. They were crying for the universal thing she was playing, the memory of every lost love, every vanished home, every beautiful, fragile thing that lives on only in the heart. The melody began to slow. The left hand's steady rhythm softened, like a heartbeat calming into sleep. The right hand's story was coming to an end, not with a grand finish, but with a gentle return, a sigh. The final notes were hanging in the air, pure and clear, ready to fade into a silence that no one in the room wanted to break. The last note faded, not into silence, but into a deep and total stillness. It was a different kind of quiet than before. The earlier silence had been tense, waiting for a mistake. This silence was full. It was heavy with the feeling that had just been poured into the air. No one clapped. Clapping would have felt wrong, like applauding a prayer or a heartbreak. People simply stood, trapped in the echo of the music, their faces open and unguarded. Ilara's hands came to rest gently in her lap. She kept her eyes closed for a few more seconds, lingering in that other place, with that other piano. Slowly, she pulled herself back. She blinked, looking at the black and white keys in front of her, as if surprised to find them there. The connection was broken. The spell was over. She did not look at the crowd. A faint tremor went through her shoulders, the energy of the memory leaving her body. She simply stood up from the piano bench, her movements slow and a little tired. The simple dignity she had when she sat down was still there, but now it was wrapped in a cloak of quiet exhaustion. As she turned to leave, her eyes briefly met those of Anton Vels. The maestro was still frozen beside the piano. His face, usually so controlled and confident, was a map of shock. All the color had drained from it. His mouth was slightly open, but no sound came out. In his eyes, she did not see mockery or pity anymore. She saw a kind of stunned wreckage. She saw a man whose entire understanding of the world had just been shaken. She offered no smile, no nod of victory. Her gaze was empty of any need to see his reaction. She had not played for him. She had simply answered his challenge with a truth he was not prepared for. She began to walk, moving through the crowd that parted for her, without a word. People lowered their eyes as she passed, not out of shame now, but out of a strange respect. As if she were carrying something fragile and holy. It was only after she was halfway across the lobby, heading for the grand doors, that the stillness was finally broken. Not by applause, but by a voice. I know that song. The voice was old and rough, and it came from a man standing near the back. He was not one of the finely dressed concert-goers. He was an older gentleman with a kind, worn face, dressed in a simple, neat suit that had seen many years. He was the husband of one of the hall's cleaning staff, who had brought him tonight as a rare treat. He had been standing in the shadow of a column, listening, all heads turned to him. He cleared his throat, his own eyes bright with tears. He spoke not to the maestro, but to the people around him, his voice carrying in the quiet, "It is from my country, from the villages in the east near the mountains." He spoke with the same Eastern accent as Ilara, but heavier. "It is a very old song, a cradle song. Mothers sing it, but also, it is a song we play when someone is gone. When the soldiers came, when the bad times happened. In my village, the old priest played it on our church's little organ, the only thing left that felt like peace." He paused, swallowing hard. "The piano in our church. It was broken. Soldiers broke it, smashed it to pieces with the butts of their rifles. Before that, my sister used to play. She played that same song." He looked toward the doors where Ilara had disappeared, his voice dropping to a whisper filled with awe. "She has not heard that song from a piano in over 40 years. Not since the world we knew ended." His words landed in the stillness like stones in a pond, sending ripples through the crowd. The story connected the dots. The deep sorrow in the melody wasn't just a mood. It was a history. It was the sound of a specific home, a specific loss, a specific piano that no longer existed. The woman wasn't just playing a sad tune. She was rebuilding her lost world, note by note, for 3 minutes. A young woman in the crowd, the one who had felt homesick earlier, brought her hands to her mouth, a soft gasp escaping her. The man from the bank found he was gripping his wife's hand very tightly. The truth was so much bigger and more real than they had imagined. Anton Wels finally moved. He turned his head slowly to look at the old man who had spoken. The maestro's proud shoulders slumped, just a little, as if the weight of the story was a physical thing pressing down on him. He had taunted a refugee. He had mockingly asked a woman who had survived war and loss to play him a simple folk song, and she had answered with the anthem of her survival, the lullaby for her past. He saw with brutal clarity the scene the old man described. He saw the crude violence against something as innocent as a village piano. He imagined Elara as a young woman, her music silenced, her world shattered. And he saw himself minutes ago, in his tailored suit, using the grand piano in this palace of art as a weapon to make a petty point about talent. The shame that had been creeping through him now flooded in, hot and sickening. He felt hollow. His own music, which he wielded like a sword to win competitions and charm critics, felt suddenly small and selfish. What were his clever interpretations of Beethoven next to the sound of a real, lived tragedy? What was his technique next to the power of a memory that could make an entire room weep? He looked down at his own hands, the famous hands that were insured for millions, the hands that graced magazine covers. They had never rebuilt anything broken. They had only ever played what was already written. They had never had to speak when words were too dangerous, or sing when it was the only thing left to do. Around him, the crowd began to stir softly. People wiped their eyes. They looked at each other, communicating without words. They had come for a night of beautiful entertainment, but they had been given a gift far more profound, a moment of shared humanity. They had witnessed a secret, and in doing so, had become connected to each other and to a story far bigger than the concert hall. The bells chimed softly, signaling the end of intermission. It was time to return to their seats for the second half of the maestro's performance. But the signal felt distant, almost unimportant. No one rushed. They moved slowly, thoughtfully, as if waking from a powerful dream. The spell of the official concert had been broken, replaced by a deeper, quieter truth that still hummed in the air, clinging to the now silent piano where a simple woman had, for a few minutes, brought a lost world back to life. The walk back to the concert hall stage was the longest of Anton Wels's life. The bright lights of the main auditorium felt harsh and false after the soft, emotional shadows of the lobby. The expectant rustle of the audience as he re-entered was just noise. He could still feel the heavy silence that had followed the last note of her song pressing against his ears. He sat down at the grand piano, the same instrument he had played 1,000 times. The keys, which usually felt like familiar friends, now felt cold and strange under his fingers. He placed them in the starting position for the next piece, a powerful and complex work by a famous composer. It was a piece he had mastered, a piece designed to show skill and strength. But as he looked out at the sea of faces, he did not see an audience eager for a show. He saw the tear-streaked cheek of the woman in the silk scarf. He saw the stunned, thoughtful expression of the bank manager. He saw, in his mind's eye, the quiet, tired face of Elara as she walked away. He saw the old man's eyes, full of memory and pain. His own music felt like a lie. It felt like shouting in a room where someone had just whispered a sacred truth. How could he play these clever, dramatic notes about struggle and passion when he had just witnessed the real thing? His struggle was for applause. Her passion was for survival. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra looked to him. It was time to begin. Anton took a breath, but it caught in his throat. He lowered his hands for a moment, closing his eyes. The crowd grew still, waiting. They expected the confident maestro. They did not know the humbled man who now sat before them. When he began to play, something was different. The first notes were not as bold as they usually were. They were softer, more searching. He played the written notes, but he could not find his usual flashy spirit. His mind was still back at the other piano. He kept hearing the simple, rocking rhythm of her left hand. He kept feeling the ache of her melody. Halfway through the first movement, he missed a note. A simple, clear mistake. A gasp, soft but audible, went through the crowd. The maestro never made mistakes. He flinched, his fingers stumbling for a second before finding their place again. But he did not get angry with himself. Instead, the mistake felt strangely honest. It was the sound of his perfect facade cracking. He played on, but the performance had changed. The fiery aggression was gone. In its place was something quieter, more vulnerable. He was no longer performing at the audience. He was trying clumsily to speak to them. He was trying to connect as she had connected. He was failing, and he knew it, but for the first time, he did not care about the failure. He cared about the attempt. When the final, thundering chords of the piece were supposed to ring out, he played them with less force. They ended not with a bang, but with a deep, resonant sigh. The music died away. There was a pause. Then the applause began. It was polite, even generous. It was the applause for a skilled pianist who had given a good, if slightly unusual, performance. But it was not the wild, cheering roar he was used to. It was just noise. He stood, gave a short, stiff bow, and walked off the stage. The emptiness inside him was now complete. The applause felt like dust in his hands. Later, in his private dressing room, the silence was loud. He dismissed his assistants with a wave. He sat alone in front of the mirror, still in his concert tails, and looked at his own reflection. The proud, sharp face looked back, but the eyes were different. They were haunted. He thought of Alara. Where was she now? Probably on a train or in a small, plain apartment, far from the glitter of this world. She had played her truth and then left, needing nothing from them. Not his approval, not their tears, not their money. She had come only to hear music, and had ended up giving the greatest gift of all. He, who had everything, fame, skill, wealth, had given them only notes on a page. She, who had lost everything, had given them a piece of her soul. The lesson was not about who was the better pianist. The lesson was about why we play at all. He played to conquer, to be admired. She played to remember, to honor, to keep love alive in a world that had tried to destroy it. Her simple melody had moved stones in the heart that his most complex fireworks could never touch. He would perform again the next night, and the night after that. He would still be the renowned pianist. But he knew, as he sat there in the quiet, that he would never be the same. The ghost of her song would live inside him now, a quiet judge. Every time he placed his hands on a piano, he would hear that old, aching lullaby. It would remind him that real music is not about the hands, but about the heart. It is not about the noise you can make, but the silence you can fill. It is not about being revered, but about being real. Out in the night, the city of Vienna went on with its life. The concert hall emptied, the lights went out. The story of what happened in the lobby would be told by those who were there, in hushed tones, to friends and family. It would become a legend. Did you hear about the time? Story. But for the two people at its center, the night ended very differently. For one, it ended with a quiet journey home, carrying the relief of a memory finally shared, and perhaps a small peace. For the other, it ended in a plush, lonely room, beginning the long and difficult work of learning how to listen, truly listen, for the first time. The maestro had spent his life learning how to make a piano sing. Tonight, he had learned, painfully, what it meant to make it speak.